1.
Good morning, everybody. Very warm welcome to you on this day 3 of the Target 190 Plus webinar series. My name's Carl Butler-Garner. I'm the Target 190 Plus Program Manager, and I'd like to extend on behalf of myself and the team and all presenters a warm welcome to you today. For those of you that have joined us for the other 2 days, but anyone who has joined us for today and today alone. I hope you'll find today very useful and have been looking forward to it. As we've said before on other days, there's been a lot of interest with this webinar series, so I'd like to thank you for joining us. We've had a lot of questions and answers over the series, which we'll be looking forward to answering after we've closed today. But also we've had lots of feedback over the past couple of days, some of which we've taken on board for today's presentations and slides. So just as a reminder to you that we do read all of the feedback that we get and we are acting upon it, and I'll be asking again for that at the end of today. If I can just start though before we get into today's sessions by a reminder. So today's event is a Microsoft Teams event. So whilst you will be able to see all of the presenters, including myself, you will be on mute and you will not be visible to any other delegates on the session today. As I've said on the other 2 days, this event is being recorded, both the video and the audio. So we will be making this and the other 2 days of the webinar available after the event for anyone who has missed it, and if you want to revisit any of the sessions of interest. The final thing is that we've obviously got, as per the other 2 days, an hour and a half on the agenda today, and that includes a question and answer session at the end of today's presentations. And so as normal, the Q&A functionality is within the MS Teams platform, so please submit your questions through that. You can use the live event Q&A, and as I've said before, we will commit to answering all questions that are submitted through that, whether we get through them on the Q&A at the end of the webinar today or whether we do that as part of the follow-up meeting materials with the audio and video recordings. And a final reminder from me before I hand over to Nicola for her recap. Reminder, stay hydrated. Obviously, it's a virtual event, so please support your posture. And I hope that you enjoy today's webinar like the other 2 days. And with that, I shall hand over to Nicola.
Thanks, Carl. And I'm really looking forward to see some more exciting presentations in this, our day 3 of our webinar. But before we go into the detail of day 3, I'd just like to take a moment to remind you of the drivers behind the programme before introducing the scope we're going to cover today. And if this is the 3rd day in the series you've joined us, you'll have heard some of this before, but as it is important, I think that's why we do like to touch on it again. So let's start with our problem statement, the ageing conventional signalling systems we've got on our network today. Signalling systems which are resource intensive to design, commission and maintain. It's becoming more and more expensive to renew and upgrade them, meaning it's becoming really difficult to renew systems at a fast enough rate with the money and resources available. In addition, current systems don't offer automatic train protection, still relying on TPWS. When we do manage to carry out renewals and maintenance, the design of our existing systems mean we need disruptive access to commission and maintain them and keep them in good working order. All of this needs a lot of manual resource to do the work, as well as having issues to manage when human errors occur when working on such systems. So when you put together this ever-growing backlog of signalling renewals, it means we're in a situation where we just haven't got the money, resource or access to deliver what is required using current systems and techniques. So recognising these problems with conventional signalling and the potential from ETCS led to the development of this R&D programme T190 Plus, all around basing towards moving towards implementation of modern digital technologies. Our focus is really on enabling the need for a sustainable signalling system, something that has become even more important over the last year during the COVID pandemic. We need to get that sustainable signalling platform in place that then, when passenger numbers start to return, we have a platform for which we can enhance in the future. And to achieve this, we know we need to reduce the current average unit rate from today's rate of around 419k per unit down to a rate of 190k or lower, ideally. This is a figure which our work on the long-term deployment plan has shown to be sustainable. We're also looking to address other identified industry challenges by changing how we do delivery and reducing our access needs. So if we move to the next slide, it looks like I may have dropped out. I think I'm back again. Sorry if I lost you there for a moment. So if we move on to our next slide, onto our T190 projects within our programme, we have 29 projects looking to achieve our target of 190k or lower, and they all take as their starting point radio-based ETCS. And by that I mean ETCS level 2, level 3 and radio-based limited supervision. On day one of this set of webinars, we focused on some of our policy or system enabling projects, which looked at how to move from conventional signalling systems to ETCS across the network by the use of cost-effective, sustainable system platforms. And we had presentations on our enterprise architecture, reference CCS architecture projects, as well as our option selection rules project, and on the essential backbone for future CCS systems communications. And I also touched on the fact that our future CCS operational concept has just commenced its stakeholder review process. And if you are interested in this, I suggested you should contact us so we can also share this document with you. Then yesterday, we moved on to our delivery enabling projects, looking at projects on data and use of synthetic environments for the design, validation and verification process, and on business continuity needs. And we showed some exciting proof of concepts we've delivered in these areas that we've been trialling on the operational railway over the last few months. And if you weren't able to join us for any of these sessions, as we did record them, and we will be releasing the recordings after this event, please do go back and have a look at them, because I think we did share some really exciting material which really will help us towards our target of achieving a sustainable signalling system for the future. So today we move to a new area, projects which are focused on supporting decision making and working with the supply chain. Phil will start the day by sharing the results from our work on procurement, supplier incentives and network rail delivery model projects. He will provide insights into how we've been working with the supply chain to deliver the innovation and cost reductions outlined in the long-term deployment plan. He'll touch on the collaborative approach we're taking to enable mutual benefits to be realised for both network rail and suppliers. From here, we'll then hand over to Sam to cover our work on whole life cost profile. He'll share details on how we're looking at all costs incurred throughout the entire life asset or system to be able to compare the options for investment and support well-informed long-term decisions. And I know we've had some questions on that earlier in the webinar on days 1 and 2, so I'm sure Sam will be able to address that topic in full detail today. Then to complete day 3, we moved from T190 plus from the R&D space into transition into real implementation. Here we've been working in partnership with the East Coast Digital Programme, and Mark will share the results from workshops we've held between the two programmes, where we've been looking specifically at the opportunities for early implementation of some of the T190 plus outputs on East Coast. So we've another packed agenda today and some more really exciting results and developments to share with you. And I'm sure Phil, Sam and Mark are going to give you a lot to think about with what they present. And I hope they will inspire you with the potential and opportunities that arise from these work streams. I've got some great expectations of what we can achieve from these projects, and I really do believe they give us the path to delivering the benefits we need to making our signalling system sustainable for the future. And back to you, Carl.
Thank you, Nicola. So, as Nicola's already mentioned, here is today's agenda, which follows the same pattern as days 1 and 2. So the first presentation is from Phil Bennett, who will be presenting about procurement, supplier incentives and the delivery model projects. Following that, we then have Sam Chu on whole life costs, and then finally Mark Farrer from Siemens on East Coast Digital Partnership. We'll then leave the session with the question and answers at the end, and with the final next steps before we close the webinar for today and for this week. And so on that note, I will now hand over to Phil for his presentation today.
Thank you, Carl. Thank you to Nicola as well for that introduction. And good morning, ladies and gentlemen. I'm Phil Bennett, Network Rail's Commercial Director for Digital Railway, Signalling and Telecommunications. And I'm also the Target 190 programme's Technical Lead for commercial and supplier related projects. I've got the pleasure over the next few minutes of highlighting the activity and engagement that we've undertaken to date via that Target 190 programme that is related to delivery and commercial approach development. And we'll be highlighting our conclusions to date, as well as providing some details on our next steps, and very importantly, the opportunities for suppliers to continue to be involved as we develop things further. As we know, there is a need for radical disruption to the supply chain's relationship in order to deliver the innovation and cost reductions that are outlined in the long-term deployment plan, or LTDP as we sometimes refer to it, as well as the rail sector deal. I think we all recognise the current processes and types of agreements between Network Rail and its suppliers at times limit innovation and have business models that are not conducive to produce a railway that is sustainable and affordable. We need a more collaborative approach, and that's an approach that balances supplier interests, but at the same time enables mutual benefits to be realised for both Network Rail and suppliers to support the industry. Put simply, we need a different output and therefore different inputs and processes required. Of course, the approach we've taken on East Coast Digital Programme, as Mark will talk about later, has started that journey, but there's more to do and we need to build on what we've done and take it further. The Target 190 programme contains 3 work streams that directly relate to how we engage with suppliers. And these work streams also align and support the content of the rail sector deal and help it to achieve its objectives for a more efficient and affordable digital railway for the future. Of course, let's start by saying we have a work stream that focuses on the most effective procurement approach to select our supplier partners. Then there's a work stream focusing on defining and developing effective supplier incentives. And finally, a work stream that focuses on identifying the most effective overall delivery model. And that's one that enables the benefits of innovation and deliverables to be realised that come from the other work streams. And each work stream, therefore, has looked at slightly different areas. So looking at a new flexible approach to procurement strategy, we create an opportunity to reduce the whole life cost to an affordable level and promote that sustainable railway. That's something that's been touched on already by Nicola in an introduction today, and I'm sure has been touched on in previous events. We have opportunity to improve the delivery and support the increasing volumes that are required in the longer term commitments. And we have opportunity to enable the implementation of systems that are better aligned to the industry and customer requirements. If we start and think about the shaping of the right incentives into future technical and business models, this creates an opportunity for a much improved supplier relationship, and that in turn leads to increased supply chain certainty. But as well, by having the right models, we create the opportunity for the reduced upfront costs that we require, and again, better certainty of planning. And then finally, by developing an appropriate delivery model for Network Rail, we create opportunity to ensure the capability and capacity is established and maintained to support the future railway infrastructure, as well as today's infrastructure. And we create the opportunity to collaborate with industry partners to promote mutual learning and alignment across our industry. So that vision, and indeed the need, is to achieve that step change from the previous ways of working and move from a historically transactional relationship to one that is more strategic and focused on a partnering approach. And that's a relationship that embeds engagement and collaboration with our supply chain to achieve customer outcomes. An approach that has the right suppliers engaged at the right time and who are incentivised to deliver the right solutions that provide those customer outcomes and ultimately customer benefits. And I think we all recognise why we need to do this. It's set out in the long-term deployment plan and the sector deal. They set out that we need a much more effective supply chain relationship, one that enables solutions to be produced for a railway for the future, one that reduces the costs and makes the railway affordable and sustainable, and also one that fundamentally allows the future signalling infrastructure to keep up with the demands of the rail industry and the public, who ultimately fund the industry that we're also passionate about. Our progress to date has been accelerated through collaboration with the Railway Industry Association, or RIA. And we've held a full programme of workshops to date with stakeholders, as well as additional events directly with supply chain to maintain an active engagement. I've already mentioned a few times that this activity aligns and supports the industry sector deal. And that's quite important because that sets out the map from the supply industry and their commitment to government for the future of our digital rail industry. And very much it's about enabling that efficient and affordable railway for the future. One of the outcomes we've identified to date has been a number of key disruptions, or you could call them principles, which will have revolutionary implications for the signalling and ETCS delivery model and its supply chain, but at the same time will help achieve the affordable, sustainable cost of signalling that we need for that future railway. Now, those disruptors include rethinking our contracts and dividing life cycle activities into reflecting the differing needs at different stages of the project life cycle, and have contracts that reflect and mirror that. The utilisation of European open industry standards, commoditising in certain places our signalling products, and challenging the historic turnkey approach that we've taken. Focusing on outcomes, not inputs or outputs, but outcomes, and having models that support and incentivise that. Having a consistent national and procurement strategy that aligns to a consistent technical strategy and roadmap, so we can see the steps in front of us, we can see where we stand on that journey. Now, of course, not all of these initiatives are new, and some are already used on the East Coast Digital Partnership, and many others relate to other Target 190 projects. But if we're going to achieve the changes we need, we do need to go through and undertake that disruption. But if we're going to do that, and that's not something to be unlikely, what are our objectives and benefits by doing so? Well, our goals for these disruptors include reducing the barriers to entry and enabling new market entrants to more readily enter the UK signalling market. Importantly, that includes SMEs. We need to make sure that our procurement processes are efficient and faster. They need to be less rigid. And importantly, we need to reduce the boom and bust cycles that some of our previous arrangements create. We need to encourage innovative solutions. We need the right solution for the right problem. We need to continue to increase our We need to increase our focus on outcomes. We have to be around not just completing projects, but on creating solutions that deliver the business benefits that are required. And we need to focus on collaboration and partnership in order to do this. We are very clear in our thinking that we cannot do this in isolation, and only by all parties within the industry working together can we achieve these outcomes that we require for a more effective, sustainable railway. And all of these enablers, therefore, all of these disruptors are designed to reduce supplier and industry costs, improve competition, and ultimately improve efficiency. So how have we developed these conclusions to date? Well, we followed a structured roadmap of workshop sessions with stakeholders, and they're stakeholders drawn from across industry and were held over a number of months. Importantly, from my point of view, we had supplier representatives involved at every session and step of that process. And the role of those sessions was to propose, review and evaluate key options that related to each of the three projects that form part of this element of the programme. You can see on screen at the moment the timeline that shows the sequencing of these workshops, as well as the indication of the 2 additional external supplier engagement events that we held, and where we shared work and conclusions to date directly with a wider pool of suppliers. We sought feedback on those in many formats, and that was then reflected within our ongoing development. But it's very important to remember that this engagement to date, whilst extensive, marks the start, not the end of the consultation process. And that will be something that will continue as we keep developing the model further over the coming months. Let's move on a little bit to look at each of the 3 projects in terms and the outcomes that we've achieved to date. We'll begin by talking about the overall delivery model. Initially, we created a long list of potential models. These reflected waypoints, you could call them, on the spectrum of delivery activity and delivery approach. Each was identified and defined in order to be evaluated. And you can see the 7 potential models that we undertook their evaluation on the slide. The stakeholder groups defined a list of success criteria that a delivery model would need to be able to achieve if we were to meet our overall outcomes. And then evaluation was undertaken by the group against each model. Those that were able to meet that success criteria are highlighted in green. And these are the ones that will support the Target 190 programme outcomes, as well as the sector deal outcomes, of course. And they will now be taken forward for further development and evaluation during the next more detailed step of development of the commercial strategy during the balance of 2021. If we turn our attention to the procurement model and the possible strategic options that could be used, the activity we've undertaken to date has been focused on 2 key areas. Firstly, we focused on possible model options around the way we would package and lot contracts. And then secondly, we've looked at lessons learned, both good and bad, from previous procurement events that are relative to the activity we wish to do. Now, these reviews have enabled a number of strategic themes to be concluded that our final model will need to enable. The model will need to be flexible. It will need to be able to accommodate a variety of differing suppliers, differing numbers and types of suppliers with differing commercial relationships at different stages of the life cycle. Of course, it will also need to be flexible enough to accommodate the differing volume needs from each of Network Rail's routes and regions, our customers, whilst at the same time retaining an overall consistent framework and approach. So a consistent framework, but with flexibility to allow for the inevitable variance that we see. It will need to be a consolidated and consistent approach to market as well. We need to make sure that we maximise the market opportunity and are respectful of demands on the market as we place these arrangements. The arrangements themselves will need to create a confidence in funding and encourage suppliers to participate competitively, as well as innovate. We will need to support those differing contractual models at different contractual life cycle stages. And we'll also need to be flexible enough to support differing technical requirements as these evolve and mature. Nicola mentioned within her introduction the use of the synthetic environment that formed part of yesterday's webinar sessions. And that's just one example that in the not too distant future will be a different technical approach that the model will need to be able to accommodate. And importantly, as I've already said, the model will need to make sure that we don't provide barriers for entry for new entrants, either now or in the future, because we need a vibrant supply chain market if we're going to achieve that efficient and sustainable railway. Again, these themes will now be taken forward for further development and evaluation during the more detailed next stage of the commercial strategy development. And finally, let's look at supplier incentives. In order to identify which supplier incentives in which areas should be focused on, we undertook a review of existing analysis, existing literature, as well as undertaking a market analysis on the UK signalling market. And that included market research that was undertaken in the latter part of last year by Network Rail. that allowed us to recognise best practice and lessons learned from previous delivery models. From this, we were able to create a list of 34 potential incentive initiatives that were developed by the workshop groups and an analysis taken against each. And that analysis was looking to determine the relative complexity and impact of each potential initiative. Separately to this, the discussion was facilitated by RIA with their members to understand from a supply chain perspective what they believed the appropriate supplier incentives would be. The output from this discussion was a list of 8 incentives. We then mapped these against the 34 items in the long list. You can see it's highlighted in orange on the slide. And what this shows is there's actually a good degree of alignment between those 2 separate exercises to determine where the likely appropriate incentivization elements or incentivization initiatives would be. We also undertook an analysis to group the 34 initiatives into one of 2 groups. The first was market incentives and the second contract incentives. Again, this was work that was done in conjunction with suppliers and with those stakeholders in the workshop sessions. Both types of incentives are key, but they serve very different purposes. The market incentives seek to foster a sustainable, competitive marketplace which is ready for the technological change required and ensures that suppliers are keen to prioritise the UK market. Whereas the contract incentives seek to ensure that where we are in contract, suppliers, Network Rail and other stakeholders work together in a desired collaborative way to focus on the right outcomes. And when those outcomes are achieved, there is incentivisation and reward associated with that. All 34 of those evaluated ideas will now be taken forward for further development and incorporation into the detailed commercial strategy. Of course, the activity to date, whilst key, is by no means the end of the process, and work continues to develop our strategy further every day. One example of this you may have seen recently is that we published a pin notice a couple of weeks ago offering suppliers the opportunity to register interest and attend a supplier event on the 17th of February in relation to the contract we propose to let for the development and delivery of the synthetic environment. I'll make a shameless plug that if you haven't seen that notice and you're interested, if you search on the Find a Tender site, that's what's replaced the European Journal since we are transitioning away from the EU, you'll find that pin notice and details of how to register for that event. The next steps now over the coming few months will be to conclude the definition and development of the delivery model, procurement and contract details. And that'll be undertaken very much in conjunction with NR's regional teams, the clients and funders for this activity, as well as importantly the supply chain community. Having done that, we will seek formal approval by NR's executive panel around Q3 of 2021, before we then launch into the formal procurement process towards the end of 2021. And this supports contracts been in place in order to start mobilisation and initial delivery towards the latter part of 2022. As the structured approach you're able to see shows, the ongoing market engagement with suppliers is integral to that development. And following on from that synthetic environment pin notice that we've issued, we'll be issuing details in the next few weeks of how suppliers can engage both collectively and individually with that ongoing conversation for the wider strategy. Thank you for your attention, ladies and gentlemen, and I'll be happy to answer questions, of which I've no doubt you've got plenty, during the forthcoming Q&A session. And with that, I'll hand back to Carl.
Thank you, Phil. It's a great presentation. That was really, really good. And I'm sure that you will get lots of questions towards the end of the session today. I think the main takeaway from that is the identification that in order for Target 190 Plus and the SEC deal and the long-term deployment plan to achieve their outcomes, of that need for disruption and that collaborative approach. And it was great to see the work that's been done over the past year in that engagement, the identification of the disruptions and thinking about the goals and benefits are of those disruptions. And the fact that in the next phases of that project, you'll be looking at the delivery models, the procurement themes and the supplier incentives. And I'll also do the same plug for you, that a reminder that the supplier event is on the 17th of February. The pin notice is out there, so please have a look for that and find a tender. With that, I shall now hand over to our next presenter, which is Sam Chu, who's going to talk about whole life costs. Sam.
Hi everyone, welcome to my presentation, which is covering the whole life cost project. I'm going to be explaining what the project is and why it's part of the programme and what it involves, the work we've done and the work we've still got yet to do. Okay, let's get going. So the main goal of Target 190 Plus is to reduce the cost of delivering new signalling equipment, but also at the heart of the programme is another key target, which is to decrease the whole life costs of signalling. This means that we're aiming to improve how our assets perform when in service. The aim of the whole life cost project is to understand how the whole life costs of future signalling compare to those of current systems, and it will support the progress of the programme against this target. Whole life cost is a key part of strategic asset management. We look at each phase of an asset's life cycle, from conception to installation, through its time in service, and all the way to its end of life and replacement. Often, when planning work, we can get bogged down in thinking just about its design, or its purchase or installation. But as we'll see in the example on the next slide, the in-service and replacement phases are absolutely key as well. Whole life cost helps when comparing options for investment. We use modelling and analysis to estimate the whole life cost of each option that we're looking at. The key is to look at all the costs incurred throughout all of the life cycle phases of an asset or a system, and to compare their total against other assets, other systems or other options. Often in the past, Network Rail's decision making has been informed only by the cost of purchase and installation, without consideration for future costs. In this graph, we can see that over 2 lifetimes of this particular track circuit type, we have large capital costs for installation and renewal, and small but frequent costs for maintenance and service risk, which is the cost of us dealing with failures. If we add up all those costs over the lifetimes, which is on the next graph, we can see that for this particular signalling asset, reliability and maintenance are each more costly than the initial costs over the whole life. Together, again on the next slide, they make over 75% of the whole life costs of the asset. And that's something that we might have missed if we were only concerned with upfront cost. Through use of whole life cost, we can make well-informed long-term decisions. Here we can see in this example graph that a lot of cost is incurred in the purchase, installation and operation lifecycle phases. But by the time we've spent that money, most of the decisions which impact on those costs have already been baked in and are unavoidable. The points at which we have most influence over the costs that we spend are right at the start, during concept and design. That's when key decisions are made which will affect the costs of running the new signalling systems. Whole life cost analysis and modelling can be used at those early design stages to compare options for selection of suppliers, for how best to carry out a project, for selection of preferred signalling systems, or for the best way to roll out the technology. This is important because without it, reducing initial cost may have unknown knock-on effects. For example, new technology may be unreliable or less safe, meaning trains are regularly delayed or more likely to collide. To support our business planning for our next 5-year funding period, we've done some early stage whole life cost modelling and analysis of the potential future of railway signalling across the whole network. The 3 scenarios that we've looked at. The first is one where we renew everything which is reaching its end of life. So that's 2/3 of our signalling assets over the next 15 years. The second is one where we aim to spend approximately the same amount that we have done in recent years. And lastly, we have a scenario where Target 190 Plus is rolled out and successful. As you can see from our table, which is obviously just an indicative sort of glance at how we're successful against these 2 particular outcomes, the modelling that we've done shows that in the first scenario, the required budget for that level of renewals is far above what we would expect the government to be prepared to pay, especially in the light of the impact that the pandemic has had. But in the second scenario, keeping to our budgets that we've previously had has a very damaging effect on asset condition, and a very high proportion of our assets would be considered life expired in about 15 years' time. That in turn might have a disastrous effect on safety and performance, and like the first scenario, isn't acceptable. It's only through achieving the aims of Target 190 Plus that we can see, and this in this case via the whole life cost modelling, that it's possible to carry out all of the work we believe will be required, whilst also keeping our spending to a reasonable level. It shows the vital importance of Target 190 Plus, as well as the contribution that whole life cost modelling can make to providing evidence to support that impact. There are various factors which can impact on the whole life cost of an asset. Upfront cost is obviously an important one, but here we can see some other variables which need to be borne in mind, which can often have complex relationships with other variables. Some of the more important ones here are the service life, which can have a huge impact if it's quite short, as the cost to renew will occur much more frequently. Factors such as redundancy or remote monitoring can impact on the level of reliability that we see, and location is also contributing to that as well, but that also contributes to how easy it is to maintain our assets. A key difference between the future electronic signalling systems and the legacy technology that we have on the railway at the moment one key difference will be the impact of obsolescence, which can severely shorten the service life. Factors such as compatibility and security will impact on this and will need consideration in the design and procurement of the systems, as well as how we forecast when renewals will be needed in the future. Whole life cost carries value in particular by assuring the outputs of this programme, providing an evidence base for how we expect the future signalling technology to perform across a range of areas and over a long time period will give confidence to our stakeholders, such as the regions and the ORR, that the right approaches are being taken. As a part of the system development process, negative long-term impacts can be spotted early and hopefully addressed before they become too expensive. Alternatively, if we decide that we can't address them, changes to the maintenance requirements or reliability performance can be identified and communicated before rollout. That in turn is going to lead to an improved performance when the systems begin to be installed. The passenger will use a railway which is safer, more reliable, and a much more pleasant experience. With the whole life cost project, there are 4 key areas of focus. Starting from the bottom and working up, the first area is with asset and supplier selection. We can use whole life cost analysis to identify the preferred technologies and suppliers which will make up the future signalling architecture, and Network Rail's got some good experience with this. The next level is the project option selection. My team has spent many years supporting our major projects with selecting their preferred project option using whole life cost analysis. We have various materials supporting this and have defined a methodology for it. Another level up, system architecture and asset policy are key levels for establishing the preferred makeup of each system and the details of how they should be installed and managed. Those architectural and policy level decisions will be supported by modelling techniques that we've developed in our team about 9 years ago, with some adaptations to include them in the enterprise architecture software. And lastly, at the top level, the regional and national level modelling of the rollout is a huge part of the work of our team. We have a multi-million-pound project to develop our business planning whole life cost models, and they're going to be used to support the strategic level rollout work for Target 190 Plus. The whole life cost project interacts with a wide section of the programme as well as key external programmes. This first slide shows the strength of those connections. I'm not going to linger on it. It's just here to show the diversity and spread of those connections. But we have picked out some specific projects which share connections at each of the 4 levels mentioned on the previous slide. At the strategic level, our key interaction is with the option selection rules project to help identify the best rollout strategy. Whole life cost will be integrated into the software package used by the enterprise architecture project, which is a vital link to us. And also hugely important at that level are the asset management, generic design and validation, and CCS in the BIM environment projects. Work at the project and asset levels will be more ad hoc, used when required to support the evidence base for the programme. Procurement, as we heard from Phil earlier on, is going to have a big impact on those as well as high levels. And externally, key programmes include the sector deal for setting expectations with suppliers and digital railway for the deployment plan for ETCS and its impacts. This is the last slide now. Year 1 of the project is going to focus on understanding the key areas where the whole life cost project can benefit Target 190 Plus, collaborating with each project to see where mutual benefit can be made. In particular, year one is going to see a really strong effort to examine how we can incorporate whole life cost capability into the enterprise architecture software, supporting the architectural development. By the end of the first phase of the project, we are going to be producing a detailed prioritised plan of work for the next phase, maximising its impact on the programme. That's going to include consideration of my team's current live project with Copperleaf to migrate our asset models into their asset investment planning software platform. That in turn is going to be used to support Target 190 Plus. And for me personally, I'm excited the opportunity to work with the programme to prove the long-term opportunity to Target 190 Plus, having the opportunity to use the modelling skills and analysis techniques that I've learned over the last 11 years in Network Rail to build hopefully a really strong consensus of stakeholders and move the railway into a bright future. Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Sam. I think we in the programme as well are really looking forward to seeing the outputs of this project when we can finally get it going in the next couple of months. And it was brilliant to see how factoring in the decrease of the whole life cost is part of the strategic asset management, which are ultimately what we're trying to do with this programme is look at that sustainability, and also how you've identified that opportunity to influence the whole life cost is right at the beginning of those schemes. So we, as I said, we're really looking forward to seeing what this project can bring us. I think as well, one of the things I wanted to reflect on from your presentation was the fact that the modelling that you've done so far in whole life cost actually shows that the problem statement that the Target 190 Plus programme is trying to answer, it is the best answer. And so it really does spur us on as a programme team to get this right and deliver what we say we're going to deliver, which is brilliant. And then finally, obviously outlining when we actually get the project off the ground, how you're going to deliver that whole life cost strategy and how it interfaces across the whole of the programme and interfaces all of those projects that we've spoken about, which is brilliant. So finally, we're on to our final presentation now. So I'd like to introduce Mark Ferrer from Siemens, who's going to talk to us about the East Coast Digital Partnership and how we're collaborating with them as a programme. So Mark, welcome and over to you.
Thank you very much, and good morning everybody, and thank you for the opportunity to discuss the East Coast Digital Partnership and what we're doing to create the next generation railway. There are three areas that we'll go through over the next 15 minutes or so. Firstly, we'll look at what the East Coast Digital Partnership is, how we're delivering the next generation railway, and areas where we're collaborating with the T190 programme. So the programme objective itself is to provide ETCS level 2 across the infrastructure from King's Cross to Stoke Tunnel, which is just north of Peterborough, removing the need in the long term for line side signals. This area is some 160 kilometres of railway and covers 36 existing interlockings of various vintages. The existing signalling infrastructure along the southern part of the route is becoming life expired and would require significant investment to renew as a like-for-like conventional system, which would then likely stay in place for 30 plus years for the life of the installation, potentially restricting the opportunity to adapt the performance of the railway to meet emerging needs of that time. Another factor that supports the use of ETCS is that the majority of the passenger trains are already fitted with onboard systems and capability to operate under ETCS. However, to achieve a no signals operation, it is obviously a requirement that all vehicles that operate within the no signals area are fitted with the necessary capability, which is being undertaken as part of the Digital Railway programme as well as the East Coast Digital programme. We'll then support the performance of that system, that signalling system, for 30 years, ensuring it continues to deliver the required levels of reliability and availability throughout its service life. Therefore, you can see that the East Coast South Railway provides a unique set of circumstances that mean that the railway is perfectly placed for the next generation of train control system to improve the reliability of the infrastructure as well as the predictability of its operation. However, Undertaking an upgrade of the infrastructure in this way touches many parts of the railway industry, all of which need to be brought into the objectives and outcomes that such an upgrade will bring to make it a success. As such, this programme is not just a technology upgrade, it's actually an industry change programme where collaboration and transparency need to form part of the common foundations. Some 27 industry partners, including freight operators, passenger service operators, rolling stock owner groups, rolling stock manufacturers, unions, regulatory bodies, suppliers, infrastructure owners, heritage and charter stakeholder groups, as well as industry bodies, all of which have a part to play in realising the overall outcomes and benefits of the East Coast Digital Programme. So how do we ensure alignment across such a broad range of parties? So what we've done is we've adopted a fundamentally different approach to defining the scope and objectives of the programme. This new approach is founded on the realisation of benefits, where we have undertaken to explore and understand the benefits that are required and could be obtained in the upgrade of the railway, both now and in the future. These benefits have then been mapped to capabilities that will deliver those benefits. The capabilities have then been mapped to requirements that need to be developed and delivered. This process has user-based design at its heart, so the users can understand the outcomes as well as understand the business change and operational readiness requirements that need to be implemented to ensure the systems perform at the optimum level. In order to achieve this, a collaborative and open model of industry engagement has been implemented such that there is a cross-industry partnership of capability that can ensure the benefits are appropriately defined and understood. Importantly, the partnership includes the technology providers who work closer than ever before with the end users to ensure that the solution will be implemented to deliver the outcomes. The way in which the programme is structured to deliver the benefits to the railway is through the principle of tranches, of which we currently have 5. Each tranche has a responsibility to deliver the benefits that have been mapped. So, for example, tranche 1, which is the early deployment to the Northern City Line, has a responsibility for delivery of the remit to realise the scope to deliver everything required to result in the successful operation of the Northern City Line itself. Tranche 2 is the first area where the new train control system will be deployed to enable operational migration. This means that we will overlay ETCS level 2 to the existing signalling system to facilitate the operational migration of conventional signalling, with line-side signals to ETCS level 2 system, which will eventually result in the removal of the existing line-side signals, enabling operation to progress without line-side signals. This operational migration area is important as it allows the business change processes to bed in and mature over a period of time. For example, it allows the driver training programme to progress, so as train drivers that are trained in ETCS operation, they can then maintain the competency by driving on ETCS, whilst drivers that are yet to be trained can continue to operate using the existing conventional systems. Tranche 3 then explores the introduction of traffic management systems to allow the management and implementation of the timetabled operations to progress throughout the day, reducing and eradicating operational conflicts between the timetable and the operating railway ahead of real time, such that a smooth and predictable service is delivered. Tranche 4 is then the progressive rollout of the new train control system once the operational migration phases of Tranche 2 are complete and the railway is confident in ETCS operations without line-side signals. At this point, we'll then migrate the existing conventional signalling system directly to ETCS level 2 operations, as a rollout programme spreading out from the operational migration area of Tranche 2. And now finally, Tranche 5 is the optimisation of planning and operation, whereby we then enhance and tune the operation of the system to ensure that the maximum benefits are achieved. The tranches are not necessarily sequential. As such, elements that fit into Tranche 5 we're actually commencing now as we learn more about the benefits that can be achieved. All tranches are supported by functional inputs, which include onboard train fitment. Obviously, every train that will travel on the programme area will need to be fitted with onboard ETCS. Also, business change, which supports the various businesses across the industry in the definition, development and implementation of change programmes to realise the successful operation of the railway. Timetable management, to ensure the timetable is implemented correctly through traffic management to realise a predictable service. And finally, infrastructure, where the implementation of the trackside systems is defined, designed, delivered and supported through the life of the installation. So when do we do it? Well, the emerging high-level migration strategy shows that we start to change the infrastructure under the tranches in April 22, when we implement the Tranche 1 works on the Northern City Line. We will then implement the infrastructure works on the Tranche 2 area in March 24 to allow operational migration for the main line to commence. The operational migration programme will then continue whilst we ready the first area of Tranche 4 in 2025. This first area of the rollout will then be implemented for operational use once the operational migration programme has concluded. From there, we roll out the rest of the migration areas in a sequence growing out from the first Tranche 4 area. While some of these dates appear to be way in the future, there is clearly a lot of work going on prior to these dates to make sure that the systems are developed and designed to realise the benefits reliably. Therefore, having stable processes and tools is essential to meeting these dates. So how are we working with the T190 programme? Well, firstly, we jointly undertook an assessment of the T190 programme projects to understand the ability to align the projects with the East Coast Digital programme. One rule that we jointly set out was that neither programme should be dependent on the other programme for delivery of inputs, so as to avoid any distractions. However, in that assessment, there are a number of areas where information sharing and capability maturity can be achieved. Whilst T190 has referenced CCS architecture at its heart, the East Coast Main Line is not deploying RCA, as it's not yet fully defined. There are a number of process flows that cut across the industry that can be explored and developed using East Coast Main Line as an example project. I've drawn a very high-level generic engineering process across the top of the slide that's on the screen now, which describes in very high-level terms the steps that the programme will take to go through to deliver the ETCS outcome. These include surveying, model creation, scheme design, followed by data and detailed design engineering processes, before commencing the testing, integration, verification and validation, and then on to the authority to place into service. An immediate area where some synergies may well exist is specifically in the area of surveying to create the model environment. These include the asset information collection and CCS in the BIM environment. Now, we on East Coast Digital Partnership Programme are currently in the process of undertaking surveys and creating the model using our current processes. However, there is an opportunity to understand how the necessary information is obtained and through life configuration is managed as the railway potentially changes throughout the life of the programme, and how these changes to the railway are captured in the model is essential to ensure that the model remains an exact twin of the real railway. So, for example, as an example of configuration management process, say where we have works to renew a crossover or a junction is undertaken that moves the toe of the points slightly due to the new profile of rail being used, where the crossover is slightly larger than the existing crossover. This may be insignificant, however, equally it could have a material impact on the ETCS system. The point is that once the surveying has been concluded, it is essential that any changes to the railway are known about and assessed in the model environment. As an industry, we need to understand the processes by which such changes would be tracked and assessed. Other areas where we're working with the T190 programme is in the understanding of interface management between surveying data, model creation, and then the processes of scheme design and data creation to ensure that the data capture during the surveying process is in the appropriate format and detail to facilitate the creation of the engineering artifacts to allow the engineering life cycle to progress. We're also working together to define how the detail of the survey results are validated, such that we know that the model is an accurate single source of truth and can be relied upon to develop the engineering without the need to constantly go back to site to confirm necessary details. So the engagement with T190 is in its early stages, but there are potential other areas for collaboration as well, which I've highlighted in blue to understand the benefits and alignment. These include engineering assurance, network change and asset management, which apply to the whole engineering life cycle. Whilst the details of what is being assured may well change as technologies evolve and RCA becomes a reality, the principles of efficiently achieving an assured system can be developed now. Other areas where collaboration to develop and mature processes are in the areas of simulation, validation, dynamic monitoring and test and commissioning, all of which aim at minimising, if not removing, the need to shut the railway in order to bring new systems into use. We're in the early stages of the collaboration with the T190 programme, however, it makes sense to work together to explore the opportunities to develop and, where possible, introduce T190 initiatives, especially for the deployments that happen in Tranche 4 as well as Tranche 5, where we optimise the operation of the East Coast Railway to maximise benefits. So in summary, the T190 programme gives a great opportunity for the industry to create a more efficient environment for railway upgrade. And with the East Coast programme, we're working closely with the T190 programme to help develop and mature these processes and realise the efficiencies that they will bring. So that's it for me. Thanks for listening. If there are any questions, I'll be more than happy to take them in the Q&A session. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Mark. So that concludes all of today's presentations. But before I move on to the next step, just to reflect on what Mark has told us there. So we heard a bit more about the East Coast programme and how it's implementing this different model for the railway industry. But also how it's an incredible opportunity for this programme to collaborate, particularly on for tranches 4 and 5 to maximise those benefits. I think Mark's echoed some of the thoughts from the presentations yesterday about the importance of the data capture on modelling, and Mark has already identified that those projects that we showed yesterday around surveying and the model environments are really key opportunities for that early collaboration. So before I open the question and answer session, for those of you that are leaving us now after the presentations, finally, I just want to thank you for your attendance. As I said at the very beginning, and I've said every day, we will be circulating the webinar recording and audio, all of the slides that you've been presented, and of course the question and answer document, which will include all of the questions that have been asked over all 3 days. Once again, I'd like to ask you if you could complete our 60-second feedback survey. As I said at the beginning, we have acted upon that feedback already in some of the second and third day presentations. We do read all of that feedback and we will take it forward for future presentations or webinars on this programme. And finally, if you have any burning desire or want to interface with the programme, please connect with us. All of the presenters' names will be in all of the materials, so you can connect with them on LinkedIn, or you can use Twitter or other ways of connection, and that way we can keep you abreast of any future events and successes. And so all that remains for me to do now is to ask Okamito to open the question and answer session, please.
Thank you, Carl. And thank you to everyone who submitted questions throughout the session. And just as a quick reminder, if you do have a question that you haven't yet submitted, please feel free to drop them in the Q&A box and we'll try to get through as many as we can this morning. So to kick the Q&A off, the first question that we have is, so will Network Rail listen and act on the ideas generated by its supply chain and provide feedback on those ideas which we can act on? And what are the steps that will be introduced to encourage subject matter experts' involvement in the process? Phil.
Thanks. That's a great question to kick off with. I mean, hopefully, in terms of what I've showed today and said, you can see the level of engagement we've already undertaken and committed to with the supply chain. And a key part of that is feeding back to suppliers on their thoughts, suggestions, where we're not able to take them forward. We've talked about the East Coast model, and when we put that process in place and that procurement activity over sort of 2019, 2020, we held a number of engagement sessions with the supply chain at each step. And that included feeding back where we're unable to meet sort of individual aspirations and explaining why. And it's often very much the case that I can have two suppliers in a session with different views about what the right solution and right way forward is. And so clearly we can't meet both, but we do try and openly engage and openly feed back on that. In terms of the sort of subject matter experts, there's a couple of elements to that, and whether it's subject matter experts or indeed SMEs from a scale point of view. We're very keen to look to get more diversity into our supply relationship.
So I think we might have
people to come in either for one specific element of maybe the technology set, or for the whole system. Because we need that vibrant market. So absolutely, the nature of our strategy is intended to enable people to be more readily able to join. And actually the selection processes themselves will contain effectively tools and opportunities such that it makes it more readily available and more readily accessible to either companies that operate in more niche markets or companies of a slightly smaller scale. We're conscious that some of our large-scale procurements can at times seem to be very tailored towards companies with a large capability to respond. And what you'll see in these selection processes is in that being minimised and being much more readily available and accessible.
Thank you,
Back to you, Okamoti.
Thank you. Okay, so our next question is, so how do you intend to target and work with signalling renewal programs to ensure the successful delivery of new technology and ways of working? Carl.
Thank you, Okamito. So it's a good question, and I hope Mark's presentation today has outlined one of the ways that we're looking at working with schemes. But in order to answer the question, and I think I covered this a little bit in the first webinar at the beginning of October, we're working with the rail sector deal, and it's part of the long-term deployment plan, and have identified the first 3 schemes within that we are planning to work with on Target 190 plus transitioning. So in terms of the how, it's through the rail sector deal and those mechanisms, those forums, that we've already begun to identify which schemes are first off the taxi rank, if you like, and are lined up to be targeted for early deployments of benefits from this programme.
Thank you, Carl. So the next question that we have is, conventional signalling will be around for many years to come, some because it is not appropriate for particular areas, and some because we will have a long transition from conventional to digital. What is Target 190 Plus and the railway industry doing about the cost of conventional, as we can't just ignore the cost challenges now? Sam.
Okay, thanks for that. That's a good question. What I'd say is that many of the impacts of T190 on the signalling upfront cost, obviously they're being tailored towards future ETCS systems, but they should hopefully have the effect of also suppressing costs for conventional signalling as well. Impacts such as increased use of BIM, more intelligent supplier engagement, more efficient ways of contracting and procurement, and all of the projects we have looking at delivery and how those can be improved, and those hopefully will all be quite useful for conventional works as well as for ETCS. Obviously, you know, they've still got the long-term deployment plan, and which is going to move us from conventional full signalling works, and they should hopefully be heavily restricted in volume from CP7 onwards. We can't really afford to do otherwise, quite honestly, but nonetheless, where we do those schemes, we should hopefully have some good impact from the programme on conventional as well as for ETCS.
Thanks, Sam. Okay, so our next question is, so what lessons can you provide in terms of business change activities to make sure regions and suppliers are ready for new technology, for example, training? Mark.
Thank you. Yeah, I guess in terms of the lessons learned for business change, we're still going through the process at the moment of understanding what the business change requirements are in each of the businesses. So it might be a little early just at the moment for full lessons learned, but I guess in terms of the processes by which we've commenced the business change, it's important to understand. You know, it's important to understand and have a clear understanding of exactly how the railway operates today. You know, every day on the railway is a school day, they say, and you know, I've been around 30 something years now on the railway, and I've learned so much on East Coast about how the businesses within the railway actually work. So having a clear understanding of how the railway, what that change is. Have I dropped out? No. Understanding the operational model that you want to move to, and bringing the businesses and making sure that you've got close alignment with the businesses that have to go through that change, so that we can get make sure that the technology that's being provided is enabled to operate and support the operation of those businesses. So having a clear concept of operations, undertaking day in the life scenario type activities to understand how the railway will operate in the future, to build that delta between how the railway is today and how the railway operates tomorrow. And the only way to do that is to work extremely closely with the businesses that are you know, that operate on the railway.
Thank you, Mark. So the next question that we have is, should the supply chain now focus on the in-cab European Rail Traffic Management System, ERTMS, signalling rather than historical trackside systems? Phil.
Thanks. I think there's sort of two dimensions to this question. I'm going to try and quickly answer both because I'm not quite sure where the question is coming from. Should we focus on ETCS, ERTMS as opposed to conventional systems? Absolutely. Whilst there will be a tale of maintaining and supporting the existing conventional systems, the long-term deployment plan, the commitments made between Network Rail and DFT and the industry are that the future direction of travel from CP7 onwards is ETCS rather than conventional renewals. So yes, that's the system. If the question is focusing around should the emphasis be on in-cab versus infrastructure, where should suppliers put their efforts, then I would suggest actually it's wherever they're best suited to be. There is a large and vibrant market and need moving forward in the UK for both the in-cab side of the technology and the infrastructure side of the technology with large volumes of activity. So as a supplier, my encouragement would be to go where your natural home area is, your natural strength is, because there's a large market for both, and we need a vibrant supply chain for both for a number of years to come.
Thanks, Phil. So the next question that we have is, so the cost of projects tends to go up and not down. How can we be confident that getting from 315k to 190k is possible when this is the case? Sam.
Oh, hiya. So as far as I'm aware, and I might be somewhat mistaken on this, but I think the cost of signalling projects has broadly actually stayed the same over roughly the last 10 years or so. But what has changed is our awareness of the makeup of those costs. Especially the costs of the abnormal extra works that we do on top of the sort of base rates, which are specific to each location. Updating our planning, our business planning for the sort of periodic review process, that has updated, and our execution of the signalling works is broadly in the same place as our planning now in terms of the costs. That means that having those things aligned, we're much more accurate, we can plan better, we can improve confidence in stakeholders of what we're actually going to be delivering. Our confidence about reducing the costs comes from two separate places. Firstly, we've looked abroad, and countries such as the Netherlands have managed to achieve signalling unit rates at the level of about £190,000 per SEU. But also from a bottom-up perspective, looking at each part of the puzzle, we're aware of there's places where signalling capital works could be made more efficient and work more smoothly. We haven't really had as strong an effort as Target 190 to try to look at every part of the process and reduce the costs in each part as we are doing now, that sort of holistic agenda of the whole thing. But obviously the most important thing to say is that obviously we have to do it. I mean, I appreciate it's a little bit trite, but we do have to achieve this because otherwise we can't afford to do all of the signalling renewals that we have to do in the next 15 to 20 years.
Thank you, Sam. So the next question that we have is, what up and coming opportunities are there to get involved across the Target 190 Plus projects? Nicola.
There are lots and lots of opportunities to get involved in the T190 projects. I think Phil has already mentioned one of those opportunities today through the release of the PIN for the synthetic environment. And there are other supplier engagement activities that we're actively pursuing through the sector deal, as well as letting contracts for delivering specific pieces of work within the programme. For people within Network Rail, we're always looking for more people to join the programme team to help us deliver. We've got a wide range of experts already working with us from across the business, and we're very keen to have people from regions, from capital delivery teams to work with us to help make sure that the solutions we're delivering really do address the needs on the ground, and that those routes and regions can start working with us to help in our proof of concepts and trialling some of the new solutions. So many opportunities to get involved from whatever part, whether you're a supplier or you're a Network Rail person, or just to talk about what we're doing with us, or please share with us your ideas.
Thank you, Nicola. So the next one that we have is, so are you measuring signalling equivalent unit rates on the East Coast Digital Programme? And what are your initial views at the moment? Mark?
Yeah, we are. Actually, it forms part of the investment process that we undertake that analysis of the SEU rate. And what I would say is, actually, the model, going back to the model that we've used and created for the East Coast programme, what we've seen is that the efficiencies that we're able to pull through by working really closely with the operators, the end users, whether that be the train operators, the freight operators, the Network Rail route teams, or Roscoe's, and everybody who's on that stakeholder map, by working closely with them, what we're actually able to do is get an efficient and appropriate solution whereby we don't transfer cost. You know, you could do a signalling system, you could do a signalling system relatively cheaply, but in doing so, you import a massive amount of cost onto other areas of the industry, other areas of the railway. So what we've done is we've taken an approach of understanding what is the most efficient way of delivering a railway upgrade and a business change program for the industry. So yes, we do measure SEU rates, but we're also looking at the wider industry context as well.
Thank you, Mark. So the next question that we have is for Sam. So why does the cost bar chart show no cost for safety risk that was green in the key?
Okay, yeah, so that's quite a simple one. It is there, it is actually there. It's just that for signalling systems, safety risk tends to be negligible on whole life cost charts. So when you monetize that safety risk using the RSSB figure of value of preventing a fatality, which is roughly £2 million per fatality weighted injury, you don't end up with a particularly big cost for signalling systems by and large. We've seen this over the years, and we've applied gross disproportion factors to it to scale it up a little bit more, but nonetheless, it still tends to remain negligible. We don't see that so much for level crossings. You know, obviously, level crossings are a key safety asset in that sense, and particularly for our less safe level crossings, they tend to actually have safety risk on the whole life cost bar charts as particularly contributory, but for signalling it isn't. What we tend to recommend is that when people are thinking about safety risks and about how they contribute to the life cycle management of an asset, don't think of it in terms of whole life cost. It generally won't be something to bear in mind. Think of it on its own, take it to one side, look at the comparisons of safety risk between different options, and bear that quite strongly in mind, because obviously you certainly don't want to be going for an option which increases safety risk compared to what we have presently. But it's much best to make that comparison off to the side rather than as part of the bigger context for signalling, generally speaking.
Thank you, Sam. So the next question that we have is, how much has the supply industry committed themselves to Target 190 plus? Can there be closer collaboration with you? Phil?
We're always looking for closer collaboration with the supply chain, both in developing our thinking and then in delivery. In terms of the level of commitment that's made, I think quite a lot actually. There's very close alignment between the Target 190 programme and the objectives and outcomes specified in the rail sector deal. And the rail sector deal is an industry deal. It's a deal between the supply industry and government. And fundamentally, that commits to 190k as an SEU rate, just as the Target 190 programme does. So the philosophy of the outcome we want to get to is very closely aligned. The other sort of element I would say to that is I sit as one of the advisors on the rail sector deal governance group. And a lot of the initiatives that the rail sector deal group are looking to utilise in order to meet that target and meet that challenge they've signed up to actually come from the Target 190 programme. So both directly and indirectly, there is very close alignment and a very close commitment from the supply industry to achievement and the realistic opportunity to achieve that 190k SEU rate and that output.
Thanks, Phil. So the next question that we have is, does the whole life cost modelling take account of not just obsolescence, but also the potential for technology development, overtaking the technology being considered during the whole life, i.e. cheaper overall solutions such as ETCS level 3 becoming more available before installed level 2 has life expired? Sam?
Hi, yes. So it's a good question. It's quite a meaty question. The answer is that will be one of the scenarios that we look at for sure. So we're going to be working together with the option selection rules project, which is looking at the strategic rollout of those options, and the availability of particular systems at different times is going to be one of those key strategic rollout things that we look at. To be honest, obviously it will depend quite a lot on the different sort of costs and when they come in and stuff. If it's a very expensive thing to convert from a level 2 to a level 3, then generally speaking, you would want to wait as late as possible before you convert. Obviously, we would hope it wouldn't be that expensive. If it's quite a straightforward thing to do, just say, okay, we're not going to be using line side train detection anymore, we can switch over to in-cab sort of geolocation, then we'll do that if we can. But it does depend just on the numbers that come in. But we'll consider that, we will look at it, and if it kind of makes sense to move on from level 2 earlier rather than later, then we'll do that. If the opposite is true, then we'll do that instead.
Great, thanks, Sam. So the next question that we have is, does the East Coast Digital Programme include operating freight services at ETS level 2? And if so, what are the biggest challenges to achieving this? Mark?
Yeah, I guess that one was coming my way. So it does. You know, if we've got if we go to a railway where we don't have line side signals, then yes, all traffic and you know, it's not just freight, passenger, yellow plant, everything will have to operate under ETCS level 2. So yeah, freight will will be operating under ETCS level 2. What is the biggest challenge to achieving this? I don't think it's a challenge that's specifically associated with freight. I think it's the same challenge for everything is that process of going through the business change. So, you know, if you look at train operators or freight operators today, they have an embedded business process. They know how their business works, and there's a change process to go through in order to introduce a new method of operation, a new way of operating the railway. And that's what we're going through at the moment. That's the business change elements that we're going through. So we're doing a lot of work at the moment with the freight operators, as well as the train operators, passenger operators, and yellow plants in how that works. You know, the challenges, the technical challenges of fitting a freight train, or it's the same as fitting a passenger train. You know, you've got to fit the equipment onto the train. You've then got an integration process to go through to ensure that installation on board communicates effectively and operates correctly with the infrastructure. So I don't think there's a specific challenge around freight that's any greater than anything else. It's just that process of going through the business change elements and understanding it and aligning the business change with the benefit, with the capability of technology. At the end of the day, we're all here because we all want to build a better railway, right? So you know, it's that process of just going through that. I don't think it's a specific thing to freight. I don't think there's anything specific to freight. I think it's just the same challenge for all at level 2. You know, obviously, if we move to level 3, where we've got end of train detection and all the rest of it, then maybe with mixed and different consists of trains, there may be different dynamics are brought in. A fixed consist may be easier than a mixed consist. But at level 2, I think it's the challenges are the same.
Great, thanks, Mark. So the next question that we have is for Phil. So how early in the project cycle is best to engage the supply chain, considering the school of thought that advises this be done as early as project planning stage?
Thanks. Well, it's a good question. And yes, you're quite right. There's a broad range of thought and that says in complex projects that you should engage the supply chain quite early in the life cycle. I think the key is, and it's about engaging people at the right point in the life cycle and the right element of the project. It isn't a one-size-fits-all solution. I think as I talk through, and you've seen in some of the other sort of content over these webinars, the move to things like synthetic environment doesn't mean we're not engaging the supply chain. It just means we're engaging different elements of the supply chain. And I think one of the things that we're keen to make sure we get right is to not try and have a one-size-fits-all solution, but it is absolutely part of our strategy to engage the right elements of the supply chain at the early stages of development in the right areas. But that may not be the same as engaging the whole of the supply chain at the first step of the process for the whole of the project. It's a horses for courses solution.
Thank you, Phil. So we have time for one more question today, but as Carl mentioned previously, we will be circulating that Q&A document to address all the questions that have been asked during the session. So the final question is, So how will the Target 190 Plus programme ensure that solutions are low carbon and sustainable as possible, both in materials and construction and delivery? Nicola.
Well, this is one of the benefits that we are looking at in the programme. And because yes, our headline focus is whole life cost reduction and getting that rate down to 190k or lower, but looking at the environmental benefits we can bring are also really important. And I think if you think about just the move to ETCS allows a really big carbon reduction to be realised, because when we no longer need to build signals and put those massive structures that you may see on some of the railway lines today. And then when you move further to level 3 implementation, you start to get rid of train detection systems. So we're removing the amount of physical assets, as well as then when we start to use ETCS braking systems and AB systems such as automatic train operation on top, actually you can start to introduce things like coasting of trains and reducing the energy needs to actually trains to run on the network. So there are many opportunities for reducing the carbon with the T190 programme, and that's a benefit that we're taking some considerable time to look into.
Thank you, Nicola. And thank you to all of our speakers and also those who have submitted questions today. I'll now hand back over to Carl for final wrap up before we close the session.
Thank you, community. Some great questions there, everyone. Thank you for submitting those questions. As I said, any questions that we didn't get round to answering will be part of the Q&A document that we circulate following this webinar with the audio and video and the slides. Last task for me, I guess, is just to thank the speakers today for joining us and delivering their presentations. As I said before, we really do enjoy reading the feedback that you give us and take that feedback forward. So I would ask, from my own personal request, is please submit that feedback. But with no further ado, I'd like to thank you for attending today, and those of you that have attended over all 3 days. Please reach out to the programme if you want any further information. But with that, I will close the webinar session today, and thank you very much.